Noel Edmonds has a plan, which is to potentially buy the BBC, and he explained to me what he meant by this idea.
My position is that I have a deep love and respect for the BBC. I don't have a nostalgia for my 30 years at the corporation, but I have a gratitude. You could say that I was born and bred with the BBC. That 30 years formed much of my career until I joined Sky and Channel 4. What frightens me about what I've seen unfolding for a few years now is that the BBC seems to be sleepwalking towards total disaster, and I think there is a real chance that we could lose the BBC to Britain, and that would be an incredible disaster.
In what way might we lose it altogether? How could that happen?
Unfortunately, certain events recently have undermined public confidence, but Project Reith, as we call it, which has been going now for a couple of years privately, predates everything that happened with the appalling Jimmy Savile scandal. It predates the issues about George Entwistle, the DG who popped in and popped out. It predates all of the inappropriate extra payments to executives, and it predates a lot of the attacks that people who are employed by the BBC have been making on the BBC, and it predates the announcement that BBC Three is going to close. But all of those things, when you bring them together, show an organisation in disarray and decline. And when you add into that the problems of the licence fee, and the fact that the licence fee is no longer appropriate to the way in which people gather their entertainment, information and education, you can see that the BBC's current policy is fatally flawed, and the business model can't be sustained.
When you say that the licence fee is no longer appropriate to the way that people gather and consume information and entertainment, I think there is a perception out there, and people who are in favour of the closing down of BBC Three as a TV channel have been making this point, but it's not always borne out by the facts. So there's a view out there that most people now are downloading and streaming and watching the iPlayer and watching things on the internet. And the reality is that the vast majority of people, including young people, but all people that consume the BBC, are still watching telly, putting on the TV and watching shows as they're transmitted. 85% of all TV viewing of any channel, including the likes of Sky, is all simply people watching television as it is broadcast. So why, if you accept those figures, why does that make the licence fee out of date?
That situation is changing, and it is changing very quickly, and people's entertainment habits, their demands, are changing very rapidly, and you don't get the sense that anybody high up in the BBC realises how quickly the landscape is altering.
Might the opposite be true? Might it be that they've looked at the numbers and realised it's not altering as quickly as people think it is?
No, I don't think the facts state that, and I think with the development of things like YouTube and Netflix, anybody who thinks that the conventional way of consuming this content will last very much longer. The YouGov poll that was conducted only last week said that 50% of people actually don't think it's great value. That's why the BBC has got a problem. The BBC consumes the value of almost 1 million licence fees. Think about it, almost 1 million licence fees just to collect the licence fee. That is commercial insanity.
Do you pay your licence fee, by the way?
I don't have a TV licence because I watch on catch-up.
Okay, yes, and if you watch on catch-up, if you watch on the iPlayer, as things stand, you legally don't need a licence fee, do you?
Yeah, and that, you see, there's another bit of really muddy BBC thinking, because people don't understand. And I wouldn't mind someone explaining to me why it is that I can legally watch on catch-up, i.e. the BBC or Channel 4 record the shows for me to watch. But if you use your Skybox to record the shows that you want to watch, you've got to have a licence fee. I really don't understand that. But going back to the funding of the BBC, there's too much. And here again, because I don't want Britain to lose the BBC, I have huge sympathy for the fact that the corporation is frankly lumbered, absolutely lumbered with things that are historic. And this year, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office stopped paying for the BBC World Service, and it comes out of the licence fee. Well, if you live in Manchester, Glasgow, Tavistock, or wherever, you probably don't even know how to get the BBC World Service. And is it right that if you want BBC Radio Devon, that you have to pay for it when you're in Newcastle? And is it right that there are only 58,000 Gaelic speakers any longer in Scotland, and the Welsh language is in decline? Facts that were part of the last census, and the BBC spent £48 million servicing that tiny area. It makes no sense. It belongs to a past age, and my fear is that unless we embrace Project Reith, then we will find a situation where the BBC is not sustainable, and its loss to the nation and the loss to the broadcasting world would be catastrophic.
So just so we're clear about how this works, under Project Reith, you and some backers would buy the BBC and run it as a commercial enterprise?
It would be run as a not-for-profit organisation, or I suspect that if we got the consent, it would qualify as a CIC, which under the Companies Act of 2006 is a not-for-profit company where the profits and assets are used for public good. So it's not a charity.
So how would you make it? Where would the money come from?
A variety of revenue streams.
Such as?
Undoubtedly advertising. If you think about it at the moment, Richard, the BBC advertises. Some of the breaks between programmes are longer than the breaks on commercial stations. So there would be advertising, except we would be advertising products and services that weren't owned by the BBC necessarily. There'd be product placement. Now, product placement exists on the BBC. You just watch any news bulletin and you will see the outdoor clothing logos on BBC personnel. Now, I'm assuming the BBC has an income stream for that, although when you look at the accounts, it's not shown anywhere. But I
don't think the BBC does have an income for that. That would be a surprising thing.
Well, then that's what you've just said is truly worrying, and I assume somebody will investigate, because it means the BBC is in breach of its own charter with regard to inappropriate showing of logos, etc. But there is a new model which also can be brought in, because the funding has to reflect the world that we're moving into rapidly. And it's not going to be one thing. It's not going to be advertising per se, sponsorship, or product placement or subscription. It's going to be a blend of things. And also, under our model, there would be something called Online Estate, which sees the BBC as a brilliant global brand, making money from the airtime it uses by making that airtime available to certain people.
So just so I'm clear, so there would be product placement and there would be adverts on the BBC. And you talked about, in your view, things like the Welsh and the Gaelic service costing too much money. Why should someone in Newcastle pay for Radio Devon? Are you saying that to make this place work and for it not to waste money and for it to be a realistic proposition, that you would put adverts in, you would put product placement in the BBC, and you would cut the Welsh language services, you would cut parts of the World Service, and you would cut local radio?
Yes, broadly, I'm saying that certainly in the case of local radio, that could be handled in a totally different way. But
I don't know what that means. You mean you get rid of it?
The BBC is already slashing itself, Richard. The fear that we have, and the reason why Project Reith has been revealed a little bit earlier than we might have wanted, is that the BBC is cutting itself. It's slashing itself. I find it extraordinary what's going on at the moment, and I really fear that unless this debate doesn't result in a change to the law, because it is an act of Parliament, and other parties are given the opportunity to step forward and save the BBC, that there won't be much of it left. I mean, what's going to be next? BBC 4, the two children's channels going to go because somebody looks at them and says, oh, they cost 150 million a year.
But that's basically what you're saying about parts of the BBC anyway. Do you support the axing of BBC 3?
Yes, I do.
Would you get rid of BBC 4 if Project Reith took over? You would.
I find it totally extraordinary that someone, I'd love to know who it was, somebody in the BBC a few years ago thought it was a good idea to bring online extra digital channels and then deplete BBC One and BBC Two of content. Okay. BBC Two is just a bucket full of repeats. Did no one in the BBC notice what happened with on digital, and ITV digital? Where at the beginning of digital, all these channels were suddenly introduced, and they all went bust in the end.
Yes, but actually, BBC Four has quite a few breakout hits, doesn't it? Shows like The Bridge probably would never have run on the old BBC Two, and it's getting 1 million viewers.
But why would you not redefine BBC One and BBC Two and make them truly preeminent, original, groundbreaking channels
with adverts in them? So that was Noel Edmonds earlier. We had to cut some of that for reasons of time. We'll put